The air was heavy with dust and silence, broken only by the distant sound of boots striking the dry earth. Arif walked slowly along the edge of the ruined village, his rifle resting against his shoulder, his eyes scanning the broken houses that once held laughter and warmth. He was young, barely in his 20s, but his face carried the shadows of sleepless nights and endless watch duty. For weeks he had been stationed with his unit near this border village, where the line between friend and foe seemed thinner than the crack in a wall. The conflict had stolen much from both sides, and each day blurred into the next. Arif often thought about home, about his mother's gentle smile and his little sister who used to run to him after school. Those memories gave him strength, though they also brought a quiet sadness whenever he realized how far away peace felt. He told himself that duty came first, that his uniform demanded more from him than his heart sometimes wished. One evening, when the sun sank low and painted the ruins in a golden hue, Arif and his comrades were sent to patrol the outskirts. The air was tense. Everyone knew that an ambush could strike at any moment. Suddenly the silence was shattered by gunfire. Bullets cracked through the air, dust rose, and shouts echoed from both sides. Arif dropped to the ground, his instincts guiding him, his hands steady though his heart pounded against his chest. As he crawled behind a broken wall for cover, his eyes caught something unusual. Just a few steps away, between fallen stones, was a small figure trembling, his breath caught in his throat. It was a child, a little girl no more than 6 or 7, her face streaked with dust and tears, clutching a torn piece of cloth to her chest. She was not one of their villagers. Her clothing gave it away. She belonged to the other side. For a moment, time froze. He could hear his commander shouting orders, his comrades firing back, but his focus was locked on those wide, terrified eyes staring at him. The girl didn't move. She was frozen in fear, like a bird trapped in a storm. Arif felt his chest tighten. She reminded him of his younger sister when she was scared during thunderstorms, hiding under a blanket, seeking his comfort. Without thinking, Arif threw his rifle strap across his back and rushed towards her. Bullets tore through the air around him, some striking the walls nearby, sending shards of stone flying. He didn't care. He knelt beside the girl, shielding her with his body, his arms forming a barrier between her and the chaos outside. "It's okay, don't be afraid," he whispered, though he knew she probably didn't understand his words. Still, his tone was gentle, and his eyes carried sincerity. The girl buried her face into his chest, clutching his uniform tightly. He could feel her tiny body shaking against him. She was so small, so fragile, and yet here she was, caught in the madness of war. Arif took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He waited until the gunfire slowed, until his unit pushed the attackers back into the hills. The moment there was silence again, he carefully guided the girl behind the broken wall, out of sight. His comrades soon noticed him, some frowning, others surprised. "Arif, what are you doing?" one of them called. He didn't answer right away. His hands were busy wiping the dust from the girl's face, trying to comfort her. His friend repeated the question, more firmly this time. Arif looked up, his jaw set. "She's just a child. She's not the enemy." The soldier shook his head, muttering under his breath, but didn't argue further. Everyone knew Arif was stubborn once he made a decision. And at that moment, no one could deny the innocence of the child hiding in his arms. When night fell and the campfires lit up the shadows, Arif carried the girl back to their temporary camp. She refused to let go of him, her small fingers gripping his sleeve. The soldiers around the fire exchanged glances, unsure what to make of the sight. Some whispered that it was dangerous, others that it was foolish. But a few nodded quietly. Recognizing the humanity in his act, Arif sat with her by the fire, giving her a piece of bread from his own share. At first she hesitated, looking at him with suspicion in her eyes. But hunger won, and she began nibbling at the bread with trembling hands. He smiled faintly, watching her eat. Something about her presence softened the rough edges of the camp. Even the hardest soldier among them couldn't deny the small comfort of seeing a child safe for once. Through the long hours of the night, Arif stayed awake, keeping watch over her. She had fallen asleep, curled beside him, her tiny hand still, resting on his arm as though letting go would mean danger. He didn't move. Instead, he stared at the dark horizon, his mind heavy with questions. What would happen to her? Where was her family? And what would his superiors say when they discovered he had taken responsibility for a child from the other side? He knew the risks, yet his heart refused to abandon her. The war had already stolen too much, but he wouldn't let it steal this child's chance to live another day. Deep down, he told himself that perhaps, just perhaps, saving one innocent life might mean more than winning 100 battles. The next morning, as the camp prepared for another day, the girl slowly opened her eyes. She blinked against the sunlight and then looked up at Arif. For the first time since he had seen her, she gave a faint smile. It was small, fragile, but it lit something inside him. That smile reminded him why he had risked everything in the first place. The story of that first encounter spread quietly among the unit, some praising his courage, others warning him of consequences. But for Arif, none of that mattered. In that moment, his duty as a soldier stepped aside for something far greater, the duty of a human being to protect the helpless, and so began a bond that neither war nor borders could easily break. Arif woke before dawn, as he always did, but that morning felt different. Instead of only thinking about his rifle, his patrol, and the uncertain day ahead, his eyes drifted to the little girl still asleep beside him. She lay curled on a folded blanket near the dying fire, her breathing steady now, her face calm after the night of safety. For the first time, he saw her not as a frightened stranger, but as a child who had trusted him enough to close her eyes in peace. He quietly rose too, his feet stretched, his muscles stiff from keeping watch all night. His comrades were stirring, some preparing their gear, others yawning in silence. A few of them glanced at the girl and then at Arif, their expressions still mixed with curiosity and uncertainty. Nobody said much, but he could feel their questions in the air. Why was he taking such responsibility? Why risk so much for someone who did not even belong to their side? Arif ignored the doubts. He walked to where the supplies were kept and returned with a small piece of bread and a tin cup of water. When the girl opened her eyes, blinking against the early light, he crouched down beside her and offered the food. She looked at him carefully, her small hands hesitating. Then slowly she reached out, taking the bread, breaking it into smaller pieces before nibbling. He watched her eat, noticing how thin she was, how every bite seemed like a treasure. She finished the bread and then drank from the cup, her hands shaking slightly but her thirst strong. When she was done, she looked up at him. There was still fear in her eyes, but there was something else too, something softer, like the beginning of trust. Throughout the day, Arif stayed close to her. He helped her wash her face at the small stream near camp, guiding her gently so she wouldn't slip on the stones. She followed him quietly, never letting him go too far. Some of the soldiers teased him lightly, calling him her shadow. But there was no malice in their voices. Even they could see that the girl felt safer when he was near. That afternoon, while others rested, Arif tried to learn her name. He pointed at her, then at himself, saying, "Arif." He tapped his chest and repeated the word slowly. The girl tilted her head, watching him with curiosity. Then, after a long pause, she whispered something soft, a single word. It was hard to catch at first, but he realized she was saying her name. Lena. He repeated it back to her, making sure he pronounced it gently, and her eyes widened a little as though surprised he had understood. For the first time, she smiled. Not a full smile, but enough to reveal the child hidden beneath the fear. That smile stayed in his mind long after. As the days passed, Arif became more protective of Lena. Whenever the unit moved, he carried her on his back or held her hand, making sure she was never lost in the dust of the march. He gave her food from his own ration when supplies were low. At night he told her stories in a quiet voice, even if she didn't understand the words, because the sound seemed to comfort her. Some of his comrades began to respect his actions. They no longer questioned him openly. Instead, a few even shared their food with Lena, offering her dried fruit or letting her sit by their side near the fire. It was as though her presence softened the hardness in the camp. For men who were used to only the noise of war, the sound of a child's laughter, faint though it was, reminded them of a life far away from battlefields. But there were also those who worried. One evening, a fellow soldier sat beside Arif and spoke quietly. "You know this is dangerous. If the higher officers learn you've kept her here, there will be questions. They won't all see it as you do." Arif nodded, but didn't reply at first. He looked at Lena, who was sitting nearby, drawing lines in the dirt with a stick. She seemed so absorbed in her little game, unaware of the heavy talk around her. Finally, he answered, "Maybe it's dangerous, but leaving her out there was more dangerous. She would have died alone. I couldn't let that happen." His friend sighed, shaking his head, but didn't argue further. He could see the determination in Arif's face. Every day, Arif grew closer to Lena. She began to seek him out, running to him when she was scared by loud noises or when strangers approached. She started to laugh softly when he played small games with her, like hiding a pebble in one hand and making her guess. He found himself smiling more than he had in months, even during the harshest duties. Her small hand in his gave him a sense of responsibility that felt deeper than orders or duty. One night, as the wind howled across the barren land, Lena woke from a nightmare, her cries echoing through the quiet camp. Without hesitation, Arif pulled her close, holding her gently, whispering calming words until her sobs faded. She clung to him tightly, as though afraid he might disappear if she let go. In that moment, he realized she didn't just see him as a protector, she had begun to see him as family. The bond between them grew so strong that the others started, calling her Arif's shadow. Wherever he went, she followed. If he went on short patrols, she waited anxiously until he returned. When he sat down to clean his rifle, she sat beside him, watching with wide eyes. He sometimes handed her a small cloth so she could pretend to help, and she would beam with pride at being included. For Arif, the girl became more than just someone he had saved. She became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the middle of destruction, innocence still existed. She gave him purpose beyond fighting. She gave him a reason to believe in humanity again. But at the same time, he knew the truth could not be hidden forever. Questions would come. Higher officers would eventually hear of the child. Villagers would whisper, and somewhere out there, someone must be searching desperately for her. Still, whenever those thoughts troubled him, he looked at Lena's trusting eyes and told himself he would face those challenges when they came. For now, what mattered most was keeping her safe, keeping her alive, and giving her back a piece of childhood stolen by war. Each passing day tied their lives closer. And though Arif didn't know what the future would bring, he knew one thing with certainty. He had stepped beyond the duty of a soldier and taken on the duty of a guardian. And nothing, not even the dangers around them, could make him turn away from that choice. The days in the camp began to take on a new rhythm. Arif no longer woke only to the sound of boots and shouted orders. Now he woke to the sight of Lena sitting up early, rubbing her sleepy eyes, waiting for him to notice her. She had grown used to the camp and the men who surrounded her, though she never strayed far from Arif's side. Whenever he moved, she followed, as though afraid he might disappear if she let him out of sight. For the soldiers, her presence became less of a surprise and more of a quiet comfort. Some of them still worried about what would happen when the officers above found out, but they also understood something important. Lena had become part of the camp's spirit. She softened the sharp edges of war. When she laughed, however, rare, it made even the tired men smile. Arif carried the greatest weight in his heart. He often wondered who she really was beyond the small figure in torn clothes clinging to him. Where had she come from? How long had she been wandering? And most of all, who was searching for her right now? He imagined her mother's face, worried, desperate, scanning every ruined home, calling her name through smoke and silence. That thought kept him awake many nights. The whispers began among the nearby villagers first. News had a way of spreading even when no one wanted it to. People who came to trade with the soldiers noticed the girl playing near the tents, her laughter carried in the wind. They asked quietly, "Whose child is this?" The answer came in uncertain voices. "She was found during an ambush. HFY keeps her safe." Some villagers nodded in respect while others frowned, whispering about the risks of harboring a child from the other side. One old man approached HFY one evening while he was sitting near the fire with Lena on his lap. The man studied the child for a long moment before saying softly, "She is not from here. Her family will be searching. The mountains may hide them, but a mother's heart cannot rest until her child is returned." His words lingered in HFY's mind long after the man had gone. It was then that Arif decided he needed to know more. He began gently asking Lena questions, though she was still shy and spoke little. He pointed at her, then made a circle with his hand as though asking, "Where?" At first she didn't understand, but slowly she began to say a few words. She told him her name again, more clearly this time, Lena. She mentioned a village, though the name was faint, spoken in her soft accent. She also spoke of her mother, though her voice broke when she tried to say more. Arif listened carefully, piecing together the little information she gave. It wasn't much, but it was enough to confirm what he already believed. She belonged to a family somewhere across the border, a family torn apart by the same war he was fighting in. The thought weighed on him more with each passing day. He knew his actions were brave, but they were also dangerous. Keeping Lena hidden might one day lead to questions he couldn't answer. Still, he couldn't bring himself to let her go. Each time she clutched his hand or leaned against him for comfort, he felt the bond between them tighten. One afternoon, when the sun burned high in the sky, Arif walked with Lena near the edge of the camp. She was humming softly to herself, dragging a stick in the dirt to make patterns. He watched her with quiet affection until he noticed a group of villagers approaching. They carried baskets and bundles, offering supplies to the soldiers. Among them was a woman who stopped suddenly, her eyes fixed on Lena. Arif felt her gaze and turned sharply. The woman's face was worn and tired, her clothes dusty from travel, but her eyes carried a fire that made his breath catch. She whispered something in her language, her voice breaking, and stepped closer. Lena froze, her stick falling from her hand. She looked at the woman with wide eyes, as if recognizing a piece of her past. Before Arif could react, the woman cried out a name. It was the same name Lena had whispered to him nights ago. The girl's eyes filled with tears, and in a trembling voice she called back, "Ami." Arif's heart sank and rose all at once. This was it. The moment he had both hoped for and feared. The child's mother had found her. The camp grew tense as the woman rushed forward, kneeling to pull Lena into her arms. The girl clung to her mother, sobbing into her chest, while the woman wept openly, her cries echoing through the camp. Soldiers gathered around, some watching in silence, others murmuring to each other. It was a reunion born from pain, but glowing with love. Arif stood back, his fists tightening at his sides. A part of him wanted to smile, to rejoice in the reunion he had helped make possible. Another part of him felt a deep ache. For weeks, Lena had been his shadow, his responsibility, his little sister in spirit. Now, in one moment, she was gone from his arms and returned to where she truly belonged. The woman eventually looked up, her eyes meeting his. She was filled with both gratitude and confusion. Gratitude for the soldier who had saved her child, and confusion over why an enemy would protect what war had taken from her. She held her daughter close, but her gaze did not leave Arif. That night, whispers filled the camp. Some soldiers spoke of Arif's bravery, of how he had protected the girl until her mother could find her. Others worried aloud about what might happen now that the truth was out. Would officers punish him for his actions? Would the villagers demand answers? The uncertainty hung in the air like smoke. Arif sat quietly by the dying fire, watching Lena sleep in her mother's lap just a few feet away. He felt both empty and full at the same time. Empty because her small hand no longer clung to his sleeve, and full because he had done what was right, even if it meant letting go. He closed his eyes and remembered the first time he had seen her in the ruins, her tiny body trembling as bullets flew. He remembered her laughter, her quiet trust, the way she had whispered her name to him. And now he reminded himself, she was safe again where she belonged. Still, deep inside, he knew this was not the end of the story. Her mother's eyes had told him something unspoken. This was not just a reunion. It was the beginning of a new test, one that would demand as much courage as the moment he had braved danger to shield the child. The camp grew restless after Lena's mother appeared. Soldiers whispered among themselves, trying to understand what would happen next. For weeks, they had accepted the girl as part of their daily lives, as though she were a thread stitched into their fabric of routine. Now, with her mother standing in the middle of the camp, holding her daughter tightly, everything felt uncertain. Arif remained seated near the fire, silent. He watched the mother's hands stroke Lena's hair again, and again, as though she still feared her daughter might vanish if she let go. The woman's eyes were swollen with tears, her face tired but glowing with the joy of reunion. Yet when she finally looked at Arif, her expression shifted. Gratitude shone in her eyes, but so did confusion, even suspicion. Why would a soldier from the other side protect her child? Why would he risk himself for someone not his own? She approached him slowly, still clutching Lena. The camp grew quiet, every soldier watching. When she stood before Arif, she spoke in a voice thick with emotion. Her words were not in his language, but the meaning was clear. She was asking him why. Why had he done it? Why had he carried her child, fed her, shielded her, treated her like his own? Arif lowered his head for a moment, searching for the right way to answer. Then he looked up, his eyes steady. Because she is a child, he said simply. His voice was quiet but firm. Because no matter which side she is from, she is innocent. I could not turn away. The woman's eyes filled with tears again. She held her daughter closer, but she did not move. She studied him as if trying to decide whether to trust his words. Finally, she reached out with her free hand and touched her chest, then pointed at him. It was a gesture of thanks. No words were needed. The sincerity in her eyes spoke enough. Lena, still wrapped in her mother's embrace, turned her small face toward Arif. She reached out one hand, her eyes pleading. It was as though she didn't want to let him go, even now. Arif smiled faintly, though inside his heart ached. He took her tiny hand in his for a moment, squeezing it gently before letting it slip back into her mother's arms. The soldiers around them shifted uneasily. Some wiped at their eyes discreetly, touched by the sight. Others murmured about what the higher officers would say when they learned of this. But no one interrupted. For that brief moment, the camp was united in silence, watching a bond of humanity unfold where war had built only walls. Later that night, when the fires burned low, the mother approached Arif again. This time she spoke more calmly, her voice steady, though he still understood only fragments. She pointed to Lena, then to herself, then to him, as though weaving the three of them together in her story. Arif listened, nodding slowly, piecing together her meaning. She wanted him to know that she would never forget what he had done. She wanted him to know that his act of compassion would live in her heart as long as she breathed. Arif bowed his head in acknowledgement. He didn't do it for thanks, but her words touched him deeply. He knew what it meant for a mother to trust a soldier from the opposite side, even for a moment. It was an act of courage, as great in its own way as the moment he had shielded Lena from bullets. The following days were filled with questions. Officers came, demanding explanations. Arif stood tall, answering truthfully. He did not hide his actions. He explained how he had found Lena in the ruins, how he had carried her, fed her, kept her safe. Some officers frowned, others shook their heads, but none could argue against the humanity of his choice. Even soldiers hardened by years of battle could not condemn him for protecting a child. Lena's mother, too, spoke boldly in his defense. Though her language was different, her tone was clear. She told anyone who would listen that Arif had saved her daughter when no one else would. She demanded that he be respected for his actions, not questioned. She stood before men with weapons and authority and declared her gratitude openly. Arif listened quietly, humbled. He had not expected such courage from her, but he realized she was fighting her own battle, a mother's battle to honor the man who had preserved her child's life. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in hues of red and gold, Arif stood at the edge of the camp. Lena came running toward him, her small feet kicking up dust. She threw her arms around his leg, hugging him tightly. Behind her, her mother watched silently, tears glistening in her eyes. Arif bent down, lifting the child into his arms one last time. He held her close, breathing in the simple warmth of her trust. When he set her down, she reached up and touched his cheek with her tiny hand. It was her way of saying goodbye, though neither of them wanted to. Her mother came forward, taking her hand, and together they walked away, their silhouettes fading into the distance. Arif stood there long after they were gone, his heart heavy yet proud. He knew he had done the right thing, and though the war raged on around him, he carried within him a memory that no battle could erase, the moment when compassion had triumphed over conflict, if only for a little while. Time passed, but the memory of Lena remained with Arif like a shadow. He returned to his duties, his days filled once more with patrols, watch posts, and orders shouted across the camp. Yet no matter how busy he became, he often caught himself thinking about the small hand that once held his, the little voice that had whispered her name to him, the trust that had grown between them in the middle of chaos. His comrades, too, remembered. Sometimes around the fire they spoke of her with softened voices. "Do you remember how she laughed when Arif let her pretend to clean his rifle?" one would say, and the others would smile quietly. Her presence had left a mark on them all, a reminder that they were not just soldiers but men who carried hearts capable of kindness. News spread beyond the camp. Stories of the soldier who had protected a child from the other side traveled among villagers, across markets, even into the ears of officials. Some dismissed it as a small matter. Others called it a rare act of bravery, the kind of story that gave people hope in a world too often filled with despair. One day, Arif was summoned by his commanding officer. He entered the tent with steady steps, prepared for reprimand, but instead found a group of elders from the nearby villages waiting. Among them was Lena's mother, standing tall, her eyes steady, despite the journey she had taken to return. She carried no fear this time. She carried only determination. She stepped forward, holding Lena's hand, and addressed the gathering. Her voice was firm, though filled with emotion. She spoke of how Arif had saved her daughter, how he had treated her with kindness when war had left her alone and terrified. She demanded that his actions be honored, not hidden. She declared that humanity must be recognized even across borders. Their elders listened, nodding slowly. The commanding officer remained silent for a long time, then finally spoke. He admitted that while Arif had stepped outside the usual bounds of duty, his actions had shown the true spirit of courage. Protecting the helpless even in the midst of conflict was a bravery greater than facing bullets. Lena tugged at Arif's sleeve, smiling up at him. She no longer looked like the frightened child he had first seen. Her eyes were brighter, her steps more confident. She was still young, but her spirit had been restored by the love of her mother and the kindness of the soldier who had kept her safe. In that moment, Arif realized something important. His role in her life was not to keep her forever. His role had been to protect her when no one else could, to be the bridge that carried her from danger back into her mother's arms. And though that chapter was closed, the bond they had shared would live on in both their hearts. When it came time for Lena and her mother to leave again, they embraced him warmly. The mother placed her hand on her heart and bowed her head, a gesture of deep respect. Lena waved until she was out of sight, her small figure disappearing beyond the hills. Arif returned to his duties, but he was changed. He carried with him not just the weight of war, but the memory of compassion. He knew that in a world divided by lines and battles, humanity still had the power to rise above. He knew that kindness could travel farther than bullets, reaching across divides to remind people of what truly mattered. And so, though he remained a soldier, Arif became more than that in the eyes of those who knew his story. He became a symbol of hope, proof that even in the darkest of times, one act of courage could light a path forward. Each time he stood guard at night, he remembered Lena's smile, her hand in his, and her mother's voice demanding that he be honored. And he promised himself that no matter how long the war lasted, he would never let the world take away the simple truth he had learned. Protecting life was the greatest duty of all.